The town had been built around water, the way a man builds his life around a single necessity, and then forgets, with time, that it is a necessity at all. A lock station sat at its heart. Concrete, iron, and old stone. A narrow throat where the Nile's flow was disciplined into order. On maps, it was a simple feature. A line, a hinge, a point of control. On the ground, it was a maze of walls, rails, sluice gates, warehouses, and worker housing pressed close. The air smelled faintly of algae and damp earth, mixed now with smoke and explosives. The lock's mechanisms creaked and groaned in the distance, as if the old structure itself were protesting the intrusion of war. Titus Rendall did not have the luxury of studying any of it. He was pinned behind the burned-out husk of a truck that had once hauled flour, tools, or canal parts. It lay diagonally across the street like a dead animal, twisted and blackened. The cab had been torn open by rifle fire. The windshield was gone. The engine block still ticked faintly as it cooled, giving off the sour smell of cooked oil. The truck gave them cover, but at the same time held them in place, preventing them from repositioning. Rounds cracked down the avenue in hard, controlled bursts. Each shot had a purpose. Each shot landed close enough to make men flinch, close enough to keep them pressed into the rubble, close enough to remind them that the enemy was waiting. The sound of rifle fire in the city did not echo like rifle fire in the open country. It snapped and bounced, splintering into false directions. A shot from the left could sound like it came from above. A shot from above sounded like it came from behind. It was the kind of surreal illusion that makes a man go mad. Titus lay low, cheek pressed against the remains of the truck. Dust clung to the sweat on his face. His mouth tasted like chalk and copper. His hands, gloved and trembling with adrenaline, gripped his rifle so tightly his knuckles ached beneath the leather. Beside him, Jonah Pell had his notebook out. His helmet was scuffed and dented, his uniform stained with dust and smoke. But his eyes were alive with frantic focus. He hunched over the notebook, pencil moving fast, sketching lines, angles, and basic geometry, pausing only to look up at the street and the pockmarked walls where rounds had chipped the stone. Jonah did not pray out loud. He calculated. 2 intersecting vectors, Jonah muttered, almost to himself. No, 3. That's why we can't see the muzzle flash. They've got overlapping lanes. A round struck the frame with a metallic shriek. Something hot and sharp snapped past Titus's ear. Titus pressed lower. Oz was on the other side, behind the rear wheel well, eyes narrowed and jaw set. His face was well worn and chiseled from battle into something hard. His expression didn't change when bullets struck near them. His hands moved with a controlled economy. Check magazine. Adjust sling. Keep muzzle trained down the street. Around them lay bodies. Several Anglic soldiers had fallen in the attempt to push this street. Men from another squad? Perhaps. Or from theirs in the first minutes of contact when the trap had sprung. Titus did not know their names with certainty. He knew their uniforms. He knew their boots. He knew the dull, sick reality of their stillness. One lay near the curb, face turned toward the sky, mouth half open as if he had been about to speak. Another lay closer to the truck, curled awkwardly with his rifle still clutched in both hands. Titus's mind tried to turn them into objects, obstacles, hazards, reminders to stay low. But his stomach refused. A dead man was not just an object. Not when you could see the frozen expressions on their faces. The avenue ahead stretched toward the lock station. Titus could see the lock's outer wall at the far end, tall and gray. A crane towered near it, its arms raised, frozen mid-lift, as if the operator had fled in panic. A narrow canal branch ran along the right side, behind a low barrier, water dark and sluggish, reflecting smoke like glass. To Titus's left, a row of houses pressed close together. Small, practical buildings with chipped plaster and flat roofs. Windows shattered. Laundry lines hung slack between them, fluttering faintly like surrender flags. Somewhere inside one of them, something burned with a wet, chemical stench. Behind Titus, a few yards back, Sergeant Lewis crouched near a collapsed storefront. Lewis had pulled the squad's radio operator behind a partial wall, trying to get a signal through the mess of concrete, iron, and interference. Lewis's voice rose over the gunfire, clipped and urgent. Echo 2-1. This is Echo 2-1. Request immediate air suppression. Grid reference. Static. The radio operator, a young man with sweat streaming down his face, twisted the dial, shoulders hunched. Signal's breaking, Sergeant. Too much interference. Lewis leaned closer, almost pressing his mouth to the mic as if shouting could overcome physics. Echo 2-1. Listen. Sniper positions. We are pinned. Need... A shot snapped. The radio operator's head jerked as if yanked by a string. He crumpled sideways, collapsing to the ground with sudden weight. Blood smeared the wall in a dark streak. Lewis ducked hard, cursing under his breath as rounds struck above. Titus's heart hammered. The loss of the radio was more than the loss of a man. It was a loss of communication. It meant no air support, no quick suppression, no friendly roar of engines overhead. It meant they were alone in the street with men who could kill them from angles they could not see. And then, cutting through the cracks of gunfire, Titus heard something else. A scream. Not a soldier's curse, not an order, not the painted grunt of a wounded man trying not to be heard. A woman's scream. High, thin, and ragged with terror. Titus lifted his head just enough to look. A few yards further down, on the left side of the street, a small house had caught fire. It wasn't large, 2 stories at most, narrow like the others. Its plaster walls already flaking in places. Flames curled out of an upper window, licking at the frame. Smoke rolled from the doorway in thick, choking waves. The heat shimmered in the air above it, warping the view. The screaming came from inside. A family. Trapped. Titus felt his throat tighten. He glanced back towards Lewis. Lewis was still crouched. He was barking orders to the other remaining soldiers, taking cover nearby, attempting to form some kind of counter to the oncoming fire. Titus looked at Jonah. Jonah's pencil had stopped. Eyes flicked toward the burning house, then back toward the sniper lanes, as if he could already see the choice forming. Oz saw it too. He didn't speak, but his shoulders tensed, and his gaze locked on Titus as if waiting for the decision. Titus's mind moved quickly, the way it always did in the seconds before action. He tried to make it into a problem with clean edges. Pinned, snipers, no radio, dead men, burning house, civilians inside. He tried to imagine the report he would write if he did nothing. Civilians burned alive due to inability to advance. He tried to imagine the report if he acted. Attempted rescue, casualties likely. He tried to imagine the faces of his men if he ordered them to stay while children screamed. He tried to imagine the consequences of losing more soldiers for civilians who might already be dead. He could not make a clean choice. In war, there never was one. The screaming rose again, frantic and desperate. Titus felt the decision settle in him like a stone. He crawled back a foot, pressed low, and hissed toward Oz. With me. Oz didn't hesitate. Who else? Titus scanned the nearest men. Two of them were pressed behind rubble a few feet away. Corporal Vance and Private Kellen. Both had been with Titus long enough to know his patterns. Both were young enough that their courage had not faltered. Their eyes met Titus's. You two, Titus said. On me. We make a break for the house. Kellen swallowed, then nodded. Vance nodded too, jaw clenched. Lewis looked up sharply. Titus, no. Titus crawled closer, keeping low behind the truck's burning frame. There's a family in there. Lewis's face tightened. We're pinned. If you step into that street, they'll cut you down. Titus's mind was already made. Cover us. Lewis's mouth opened, then closed. He understood that there was nothing he could say in the moment that would dissuade him. Lewis then nodded once, sharp and reluctant before looking toward the men beside him. Covering fire. Now. Titus reached for a smoke grenade. His fingers were steady now, the way they always became when the moment of decision passed. He pulled the pin, counted half a breath, then threw it down the street. The grenade bounced once, rolled, and burst into thick white smoke that expanded rapidly, swallowing the middle of the avenue. Now, Titus hissed. They ran. The street between their cover and the burning house could not have been more than 15 yards. But in that moment, it felt like an ocean. Titus sprinted low, body angled forward, boots slamming stone. He heard rounds crack through the smoke, sharp snaps and angry thuds. He heard Oz grunting as he ran. Kellen's breathing turned ragged. A round struck something metal nearby with a harsh ping. Then a man screamed. Vance. Titus glimpsed him stumbling, his body twisting. Vance's rifle slipped from his hands as he fell hard onto the street. The smoke swallowed him as he hit the ground, and the sound of his body striking stone was sickeningly final. Titus did not stop. He couldn't. They reached the house. The doorway was choked with smoke, the air inside a thick, oily heat. Titus slammed his shoulder into the frame, forcing his way in. The interior was dim, lit only by the orange flicker from the flames above. Furniture had been knocked aside. A table lay overturned. The walls were stained with soot. "Where are you?" Titus shouted, voice raw. "In here," a woman cried, muffled and panicked. Oz moved ahead like a battering ram, one hand raised to shield his face from heat. Kellen followed close behind Titus, coughing hard, eyes watering. They found the family in a back room. The mother crouched near the floor, one arm wrapped around a small boy, the other around a little girl. Their faces were black with soot and ash. The girl's eyes were wide and glassy with terror. The boy made choking sounds, half coughing, half crying. The mother looked up as the soldiers burst in, her expressions shifting from fear to disbelief, as if she could not accept that rescue had arrived. "Come," Titus barked. "Now, move." Oz scooped the little boy up without waiting. Kellen reached for the girl, lifting her carefully. Titus grabbed the mother's forearm and pulled her to her feet. The ceiling groaned above them. A deep crack ran along a beam overhead, wood splitting under heat and strain. Plaster dust drifted down like pale snow. "Go," Oz shouted. They ran back toward the doorway. The smoke thickened, stinging Titus's eyes. He could hear the roar of the flames upstairs, hungry and alive. The air was so hot it felt as if his skin was peeling from his face. They reached the front room. A sudden, violent sound, like a great sundering, shuddered through the house. The structure began to give. Titus felt the floor lurch under his boots. Kellen stumbled, clutching the girl tighter. Oz surged ahead, boy held close against his chest. Titus shoved the mother forward. "Run," he ordered. They burst out into the street. The smoke outside was brighter, clearer. Titus gulped air that tasted of dust and ash, but felt like life compared to the choking heat inside. Behind them, the house collapsed. Not slowly, but violently. It folded inward in a thunderous rush of stone, timber, and fire. Kellen was still at the threshold when it happened. Titus had seen him turn, saw the instinctive, stupid human reflex to look back, to make sure nothing was left behind. In that half second, the wall above cracked free. The collapsing roof smashed down. Kellen disappeared beneath it. The girl screamed as Kellen's arms pushed her forward, the force throwing her ahead. Titus caught her by the shoulder, yanking her away as debris spilled onto the street. Oz spun, eyes wild. Kellen! Titus dragged the girl toward cover. No time. Lewis and the squad are firing now, laying down suppression fire through the smoke, trying to keep the snipers' heads down. Rounds snapped around them like whips. The mother stumbled, coughing, half carrying herself, half being pushed forward by the will to survive. Oz hauled the little boy with one arm and shoved the mother with the other. They made it to the truck's cover, slamming down behind it. The family collapsed into the rubble, sobbing and coughing, clinging to each other. The girl's small hands gripped Titus's sleeve. Titus pried them off gently, pushing her toward her mother. You go, he said, voice rough. Go now. Get out of here. The mother looked at him, eyes huge and wet. She opened her mouth as if to speak. A thank you, perhaps. Titus didn't wait. He pointed down a side alley that offered some protection from the sniper lanes. That way. Run when we fire. Lewis understood immediately. He barked an order, and the squad unleashed a short, furious burst of rifle fire down the avenue. Not to hit, but to force the snipers to duck. Move, Titus shouted. The mother grabbed both children and ran, hunched low, feet slipping on the debris. Oz pushed them forward with a hand on the boy's shoulder until they disappeared into the alley's shadow. And then it was done. The screaming stopped, not because the world became kind, but because the family was gone, and the men Titus had sent were gone too. Vance lay dead somewhere in the street. Kellen lay under the collapsed house. Titus did not look at Lewis. He did not look at Jonah. He stared at the alley where the family had fled, and felt something inside him turn cold. The fight did not end cleanly. Urban fights never did. The snipers eventually shifted positions, slipping away like ghosts once they had inflicted enough casualties. A heavier Anglic unit pushed in from the other side streets, bringing machine guns and mortar fire. The lock station became a soundscape of clanging metal, shouted orders, distant explosions, and a constant oppressive buzz of smoke and dust. By the time the avenue was secured, Titus's squad had fewer voices in it. Hours later, the town sat in a kind of stunned silence. The lock gates still stood, the canal still held water, the crane still loomed, but the street that had been their trap was now littered with debris. Empty casings and the bodies of men who would never rise again this side of heaven. Titus sat on a broken wall near the lock station, helmet on the ground at his feet, hands resting on his knees. The wall had once bordered a small courtyard. Now it was half collapsed. Its stones chipped and stained. A canal side railing nearby was bent and torn, as if someone had tried to rip it out in frustration. Water moved slowly beneath, indifferent to the blood spilled beside it. Titus stared at his hands. There was blood dried in the creases of his gloves. He could not remember whose. He tried to replay the moment as if it were a tactical exercise he could correct. Pinned, burning house, 2 men chosen, smoke thrown, run, Vance hit, inside, family found, Kellen crushed. He tried to pinpoint where he could have altered it. Should he have waited for better suppression? Should he have sent different men? Should he have gone alone? Should he have ignored the house? In war, sometimes every choice feels wrong. The only difference was which poison you chose to swallow. Titus breathed hard, throat tight. He had ordered men to their deaths. Not as an abstraction, not as a line on a map. He had looked Kellen in the eye and said, "With me." He had watched him run. He had watched him vanish. The realization sat like lead in his stomach. He felt older. Not because years had passed, but because of the weight. The burden of command was not simply responsibility. It was living with the memory of every face that had trusted your voice. Footsteps approached behind him. Titus turned to look. Lewis sat down beside him slowly, as if careful not to disturb the fragile stillness that had settled over Titus. Lewis's face was smeared with soot. His eyes were tired. A bandage wrapped around one forearm where shrapnel had grazed him. The fabric already stained. For a while they sat without speaking, listening to the distant murmur of the lock station, the clank of metal, the groan of old machinery, the faint trickle of water. Lewis finally spoke, voice low. "You did what you thought was right." Titus's jaw tightened. "I got them killed." Lewis didn't flinch. "Yes." The honesty cut sharper than comfort would have. Lewis continued, "But you didn't get them killed for nothing." Titus looked away, staring at the water. "It doesn't matter. They're still dead." Lewis exhaled slowly. "It matters. Not in the way we wish. Not in a way that makes the pain go away. But it matters." Titus paused, having to force the words out. "I ordered them forward. They trusted me. And they died." Lewis nodded. "That's leadership." "People think leadership is being loud," Lewis said. "Or brave. Or inspiring. They think it's getting men to follow you. But real leadership involves ordering men to do things that may get them killed. And doing it anyways, when it must be done." Titus's eyes stung. He blinked hard. Lewis's voice softened. "God only knows if you made the right choice. It's not your job to grieve over decisions you could have made. You took a step. Learn from it and push on. Titus's hands clenched. That's not comforting. Lewis glanced at him. It's the truth. If you don't take the next step, then someone else who knows much less than you will. Titus stared ahead, jaw tight. Lewis continued quietly. Those men, Vance, Kellen, they're with the Lord now. Titus's voice was rough. And I'm not. Lewis nodded slowly. No. You're here. God could have just as easily made it you today. But he chose not to. It is your job to carry the burden forward. Titus swallowed, throat burning. I don't want to carry it. Lewis's gaze held him for a moment, steady and unyielding. None of us do. But that's the cost of being the one who gives the order instead of receiving it. A long silence fell. The sky above the town was pale, washed thin by smoke. The water below moved on, dark and indifferent. Lewis spoke again, softer now. You'll be tempted to harden, to turn it into numbers, to refuse to feel the weight and loss. Lewis leaned in. Don't do that. Titus looked Lewis in the eyes. What else am I supposed to do? Lewis's expression was tired, but his voice carried the weight of conviction. You remember them. You thank God for them. You grieve for them. And then you keep leading. And you ask the Lord to keep your heart from turning into stone. Titus looked back at the canal. What if he doesn't? Lewis's jaw tightened slightly. He will, if you ask him. Not because you deserve it, but because he is faithful. Titus let out a slow breath. It doesn't feel like faith. Lewis nodded. Faith rarely feels like faith. If religion was based on feelings, it would sway and falter at the first sign of hardship. Our faith is based on reality, history, truth. Our job is not to feel faithful, but to be faithful. Titus's eyes lowered. They died because I decided they should. Lewis's voice remained steady. They died because the world is broken and war is hell. You didn't create that. You stepped into it. And in the middle of it, you chose to save people who couldn't save themselves. Titus's shoulders sagged. A small shift that betrayed his exhaustion. Lewis looked at him for a long moment and said, You'll never know if you made the perfect choice. That's not given to us. But you are accountable for your choices. The Lord is gracious when you fall short. Titus's fingers loosed slightly on his knee. Lewis rose to his feet slowly. Come on, he said. We've got work to do. Men to account for. Wounded to move. A locked station to hold. Titus didn't stand right away. He stared at the water, at the slow and steady flow that did not pause for grief. He thought of Vance's face, young, determined, now gone. He thought of Kellam's quick nod when he ordered him. He thought of the little girl's hand gripping his sleeve, and the way her mother's eyes had looked at him, fear and gratitude tangled together. He thought of the Lord, unseen, present even when silent. Then Titus picked up his helmet, stood, and followed Lewis back into the ruined town. The burden of command settled on his shoulders again. Not lighter, but carried, because it had to be. And because somewhere beyond the smoke, beyond the snipers, beyond the lock station, the canal and the war, there was a kingdom that did not crumble, not even under fire.